Ascultați Books Are Magic, powered by editura Nemira, un podcast despre cărțile, poveștile și oamenii care schimbă lumea. Numele meu e Filip Standavid. Etiopia, o țară mândră din cornul Africii, cu o istorie de mai multe milenii, e invadată în anii 30 ai secolului trecut de Italia fascistă. Împăratul însuși, Haile Selassie, trebuie să fugă, iar restul lumii e la un pas să se predea. Acesta e momentul în care rezistența în derivă pune la cale un truc, o dublură a împăratului, un țăran cu numele Minim, e ferchezuit în grabă și pus să-i îmbărbăteze pe cei rămași în urmă. Dar acesta e și momentul în care femeile din Etiopia pun mâna pe arme și iau nemijlocit parte la luptă. Hirut, slujitoarea unei aristocrate, îi devine gardă de corp și ne devine nouă ghid prin povestea din Umbra, regelui, un roman apărut în colecția Babel a editurii Nemira și un veritabil cântec de război cum puține există în literatura contemporană. Stăm de vorbă la Books Are Magic cu autoarea acestui roman, Maaza Mengiste. Vom purta discuția în limba engleză, traducerea e de găsit pe blogul editurii. Maaza Mengiste, thank you for taking the time and welcome.
Thank you so much, Philip. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Many of your readers, I imagine, your first-time readers, will ask themselves really early on, how on earth did I not know about this? It's an absolute stunner of a story, a David versus Goliath type of story, complete with Ethiopia actually winning against a ferociously modern European army, and doing so, by the way, for a second time. How much did you know about this war before setting out to write the actual story?
I knew a version of this story growing up. If you can imagine, in Ethiopia, this war is a source of national pride. It's a source of national identity. I grew up hearing of the men in my family on my father's side, the men on my mother's side. All of them were connected in some way to this war, and we were always hearing about it. If someone came into our house, someone of my grandfather's generation, for example, someone would say, oh, this person is the daughter or the son of this man who was this army general in the battle here. So people were connected to this war. I thought I knew this history growing up, but it wasn't until I started researching that I discovered the women and their role in this, which was a complete surprise, and it changed the way the whole book went. I started again and rewrote the book from a woman's perspective.
Let's unpack the myth, sort of.
Yes, it had, I had to unpack even the Ethiopian myth of this war.
It took you about 10 years to document this book. You wrote a first version of it, then rewrote it entirely. And you've spoken before about the detective work you had to do. Was there any eureka moment when the story just sort of revealed itself, or was it just a hell of a lot of work?
That's a good question. There was a moment when I stumbled upon a photograph of a woman in uniform with a rifle and a pistol. And that moment changed everything. That was that eureka moment. I remember looking at it and saying, oh my goodness, I've been doing this whole book wrong.
That must be disheartening to some extent.
In some way it was, but also really exciting. I didn't like the book the way it was going. It felt so, it was boring to me. It felt very ordinary. There was nothing new that I was discovering. I was just writing historical moments. This was something brand new. It made me think of the war in a very different way, to imagine conflict from a woman's perspective, you become very aware of nearly every aspect of what it means to survive, but what it also means to fight. And that made the book much more interesting. So that's part of the reason it took a long time.
And then there's Hirut, una bella ragazza, una soldata feroce, as one of the Italians, the invaders in the book, aptly describes her. The novel could have easily had her in the title, and it could have made all the sense in the world. Why doesn't it, though?
Thank you for that question. I was thinking at some point about this title and the many meanings of it. There is, of course, in the book, without saying very much, there is that person we imagine as the Shadow King. But this book is also about photography. And a photographer works in shadow and light. I imagined him as someone who worked in the shadows and was king of that land that's made up of shadows. There's a line that his father tells him that every body, every physical human person, every body moves between shadow and light, and
Yes.
you have to understand where you are. And the title resonates with that. And I think for Hirut and Aster and the women, when Emperor Haile Selassie left the country to go to England, there was a group of people that had to rise up and replace the king, not the queen. And so I think all of those women, Hirut, Aster, they were the Shadow King.
They're all Shadow Kings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
But there are also all sorts of abuse, and then some more, the women in this story are going through. And I think it's fair to say you do not ever shy away from asking why that happens. I was wondering, though, why was it so important to have Hirut and Aster to go against one another really early on in the book?
I wanted to complicate women in the same way that male characters get complicated in novels. Just because there are two women with a common cause, it doesn't mean that they'll get along. Human beings don't always get along, even if they have to work together. And I wanted to imagine a solidarity that was built not on love,
Sisterhood.
but yeah, not on sisterhood exactly, but out of a grudging respect that they both had to earn from each other. I think Aster wants to be in this war. She wants to fight. She wants to fight for freedom, not only the country, but in a sense, her own freedom. But that does not mean that she was fighting for Hirut's freedom. She still imagined a society after the war where she would be of a higher social status. She would receive
as
more.
She already is,
Yeah,
by the way.
exactly.
She's in a position of power regarding
Exactly.
Hirut,
Yes,
and
she
exercises that power.
Absolutely. And she didn't necessarily want to change that system. She just wanted to fight this war. And I think that makes her, it makes her difficult to get along with. But I think I wanted to write that kind of character, someone who's not so nice.
It also seems to me you also bravely resist another cliche in this book, the traditional love during wartime subplot, let's say. There are hints of that. There are some actual couples in the book. There's also the promise of love between Hirut and Aklilu, and it's endearing and sweet. And as I was saying, it leads towards a promise, but it doesn't exactly develop. Why not go down that route, though?
This is the same question that my editor asked me after. And we really had a fight about it. And I kept saying, no, this is not a love story. I think that we want to imagine that when human beings go through something that is as catastrophic as conflict, as war, that it makes us feel better to imagine that two people fall in love. It's a very romantic, a very Hollywood kind of story.
Absolutely.
But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to think about how would people really feel. I think that they would be devastated by everything. And if there is a love and there is a tenderness between Aklilu and Hirut during the story, but they're also dealing with so many other things that love is there in the form of kindness between them, but it comes later. I just could not do it, and I know my editor really wanted me to have Hirut and an Italian fall in love, and
Go
I
at
said,
it.
it's just absolutely not. Absolutely not. And after the book was published, she said, "I'm so glad you fought me. I'm really glad you didn't give in."
But mirroring Hirut and Aklilu, there are Fifi and Colonel Facelli. And there's another whole book in itself, an Ethiopian, well-read, well-traveled woman of the world, basically undermining the invader in his own tent.
Yes. Yeah. I find Fifi a really interesting character, and I'm really glad you asked about her, because not many people ask about their relationship. I was trying to imagine the kind of relationship that would exist between two people who are sharing intimacies, and in some ways bound together by the war, who sleep together, who know each other in one way much better than the other one thinks that they know them. What comes from that kind of relationship if it's not romantic love? If Fucelli doesn't know how to love, or he doesn't know how to express it, how do I create something that's not that romantic love, but is something else that's more complicated and cannot go by the name love, but there is no name for it necessarily. Attraction, yes, but he's also cruel to her, and as you said, she's undermining him, and at the same time,
she knows him at his lowest point in his life. We ain't going to be talking about the scene itself, but it's one of the most enthralling parts of the book, I find. It's whatever happens next. What is she going to do? How is she negotiating this? Because there's no blueprint for it.
Yeah, and I found that's a much more interesting territory for me as a writer, to move my characters into the space that it makes me uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable while writing it, because I think it's much easier for us to say that I have this feeling and it has this word for it. And so I will behave in this way according to that word. But if you can't quite define an emotion, there's a freedom in that as well. And I wanted to give Fifi that freedom to move in this emotion that's not named. So she does certain things, like you're saying, and that at the same time undermines him. She needs him.
What I love about that character is that she's so utterly unapologetic and voicing out really hard truths. As in, we've been here a couple of millennia, boy. You were just peasants in Italy while we were building an empire. And it feels somewhat, I don't know, there's not an exact word for that either. It feels well earned. Let's go.
Thank you. I like that. Fifi was really a wonderful character to write. She knew her history, and she had pride, even though by Ethiopians and also by many Italians, she would be detested by both groups. She was in danger in Ethiopia for her place in the life of Fuchelli. She knows it, but she's still proud of who she is.
As any good spy, she would be considered a traitor by both sides.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I think that maybe one of the greatest qualities of this book is how it doesn't see war as one great victory march, but a series of on the spot decisions that almost make themselves. And it's decisions like this that bring these women to the forefront, whether it's Aster recruiting soldiers on her own, Hirut hanging on to her father's rifle, or the cook showing huge kindness to the prisoners and trying to prepare them for what's coming. It's not something you read in just any other war novel. And I was wondering, how intentional was it to have these characters sort of just going about their business while everything around seems to be falling apart?
Uh, I wanted to create a world where my characters are still their own person, despite this war. I'm really interested in the questions of survival, but also complicity and collaboration. I wanted to imagine a group of people who needed to survive in some way, and needed each other at the same time as they're fighting amongst themselves. One of the questions that I was asking myself in this book is, who is the real enemy here? We have one major conflict, which is between the Italians and the Ethiopians, but within the camps, amongst Ethiopians, there were huge divisions, and I wanted to reflect some of that in my book. And yet, people had to keep going. People had to go about their lives. The cook had to, as much as she tried to leave and isolate herself from the reality of this war, she ended up right back in it. It's impossible for her to completely separate herself from what was happening.
And there's a sturdiness about the cook that's absolutely enthralling to read. She just does whatever needs to be done. Sorry.
Absolutely, absolutely. And she knows that she is employed. She's not employed, she's an enslaved person.
Exactly.
And she has been used her whole life for her usefulness. That she knows how to take care of things, and she resents it, but at some point she realizes that she can use it for somebody else by choice, that can help people, like the prisoners that you mentioned. That she has the option to use that usefulness for a purpose that is her own choosing.
You're listening to the Books Are Magic podcast. Maaza Mengiste, author of The Shadow King, is our guest. There's an intense musicality about this book. Some of the fight scenes read almost as lucid dreams. There are quite a few interludes marked as such, and there's also actual music and joyous dancing at times. Overall, I'd say it feels almost like an ancient epic, the kind that's meant to be read aloud, passed on from person to person. And I have to ask, what inspired you to go about it this way? It almost reads as the Iliad, I would say, at times.
Thank you so much for noticing that. in the reading. I was inspired by the Iliad. It was one of these books when I first read it. I think I was in high school, and it enthralled me. It completely enthralled me, and I have since read it I don't know how
countless
many times.
yeah.
And I in some way I wanted to create a book that had that momentum, especially of the battle scenes that Homer writes. I wanted to think about how did he do that? What makes those scenes so powerful? I wanted to write a book that echoed an epic poem in some way, as a homage to the Iliad, but also in Ethiopia. And I think that this is true for cultures around the world. We have a group of people called the Asmari.
Yes.
They are, I believe you have them in Romania as well.
The keepers of folklore, the people that pass on whatever may have happened. Yeah.
Yes. And in Ethiopia, they also do it through song. And in villages, this is how people are remembered. This is how certain battles that might happen away from the city are recorded. And a heroic act becomes part of a song that then is told again and again and again and passed down from village to village. The Asmari still exist in Ethiopia. They work in small bars across the country. If you go in and sit down, they entertain the patrons of the place. They sing a song about you immediately. They make it up. They pass gossip. They tell you who's having an affair with who, and they do all these things. And so I wanted to honor them as well. The idea of song being used to remember history was existing, I think, for millennia. It's not only a Greek phenomenon.
It's probably our first form of language, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And I wanted to honor that.
And then there are times when the Shadow King almost feels like a multimedia experience. There are photos, actual and narrated, wartime newsreels, Emperor Haile Selassie listening to Aida incessantly, making me go back to it at some point. So I think we need to talk about Ettore, the Jewish Italian photographer in the book. There's another character you do not encounter in just any war book. How did he come about?
I started learning this history when I lived in Rome. I started learning this history of Italian Jews during fascism in the country. And I realized that there were soldiers who were Italian and also Jewish who were enlisted in the military. And when anti-Semitic laws were passed, I think it was in 1938, they had to leave the army. They were Jewish people were removed from all public office. So I knew that there had to be soldiers also stationed in Ethiopia who were Jewish and who had fought in the war. And I wanted to imagine what that might have been like for one person on one side to fight as an Italian, to have a group of people that you consider the enemy, to enforce racial segregation laws. Once Mussolini declared the war over, there were racial laws that were like apartheid in Ethiopia. To be someone who enforces those laws, 1 year, it took effect in 1937. And then in 1938, anti-Semitic laws are passed and you become the enemy. Who are you at that point? And Ettore was an interesting character for me to consider those questions again of who is the enemy. And he brings his camera to war and he is ordered to photograph different acts of atrocity that Colonel Fuchelli does to Ethiopians. And he has to think about his compliance and following orders, and what does it do to somebody when your talent, the gift that you have, is being used for the service of cruelty. He calls himself the archivist of atrocities, the collector of atrocities. And I wondered what would happen. Yeah. And we know that those people have existed, and they exist even today. We know that people like Ettore still exist. For some reason, authoritarians and dictators have wanted to record what they've done.
They still do.
They still do. And I wonder about the person on that other side of the camera. I've always been curious about that, and Ettore was a way for me to ask those questions.
There's a whole discussion to be had, I think, about the way the war is memorialized here in this very book, because that's what Ettore, it seems to me, is doing up to a point. And he's also asking the questions I figure you were asking. What does this picture of a woman that's been forced to get naked against her will, and then have the photo circulated all over a country, a proud country, as I was saying, what does this do, and how do you remember what happened based on that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it reinforces for me this idea that when a war happens in a country, women are subjected to so many different kinds of violences. Death is not the only thing that can happen. Women are considered the trophies in war, but they're also considered territory to conquer. When an enemy comes into a land, one of the first things they do is take the women, because they know if you take the women, you are, in essence, damaging that community. And not only are you damaging that community, but you are affecting generations to come. And that's a woman carries so much just in her body. And that is reflected, I think, in those pictures that Ettore was taking, that Fuchelli wanted to take. He was sending them out to show people, these women are not warriors. Look what we can make them do. We know it still, of course, happens today. But I wanted to imagine what does Ettore think? What does a man feel when he's taking those images?
How does a decent man see that? How does he react?
Absolutely, yes.
Also, the chapters in this book that are titled simply Photo pack quite a punch. I would go as far as to say they may be one of your major bets here, as they reinterpret the horrors of war by just imagining who the people in those photos might have been, what might have gone through their minds when the photos were taken, and so on. And you've talked already about decolonizing war archives. Did you set out to do that in the very, very beginning, or was it, again, some sort of, let's say, happy coincidence?
I did not set out to do that. I just was going to do my work and finish this book as quickly as I could. and and then I started, the further I went into those archives, the more I realized the information has been not only censored, but altered, and information has been removed to create a narrative of war and of colonialism that benefited Italy, and benefited the fascists. And I realized then that that act of decolonizing the archives is an act that I think all of us have to take part in. But the fascists never intended for someone like me to come decades later and look through their papers and look through their photographs and understand what they were doing and understand a bit of the missing information. And I think that is, it was an active, eventually I realized this is an active role that I need to take, is I need to push back against the way this history has been remembered, because it's been remembered in one particular way and also forgotten by Italy. And I think that amnesia has created a way of understanding migration, a way of speaking of Africans in Italy that has been detrimental, not only to Italians, of course, but also to Africans in the rest of Europe.
Everybody involved, indeed. And it may seem unnecessarily haughty of me, but it's like imagination somehow is not rewriting history, but adding to it. There's something more to fascist propaganda than just soldiers marching on towards the new Roman Empire. There's a hell of a lot more there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And as we talk, Ethiopia is being yet again ravaged by a war that's threatening millions with hunger, whilst international powers such as China and Russia, but not only them, appear to be meddling for yet again influence and fighting over African resources. Isn't it somewhat tragically ironic how you wrote a book about events from almost a century ago to have it feel so contemporary after all?
It's been heartbreaking. Absolutely. It's been devastating to see this war unfold the way that it has. Ethiopia and her people have been suffering, I think, one traumatic event after another, one war after another, and it feels that generations don't have time to heal or recuperate before something else begins. My heart goes out to everyone there. The war began in Tigray, and women and girls have suffered tremendously there. The sexual violence has been horrifying. The war has spread now into different regions, and there's been ongoing conflict in other parts of Ethiopia as well.
Other parts of Africa also. It
Yeah.
seems like a major war zone if you just bother to find some information about it.
Yeah, I really, yeah, my heart goes out to all the people. I'm not sure, we have our own troubles here in the United States. There's, one conflict or one, it just seems like Black people here are constantly under attack by a police system. So we have those things here as well, but to be here and to watch what's happening in my homeland is devastating.
Do you see a way out of this seemingly never-ending cycle of violence? I know it's a really tough question to ask.
That is, it's not going to come through force, and yet there needs to be dialogue where groups of people who have been usually left out of the conversation in Ethiopia. Every ethnic group needs to have a voice in this dialogue. I hope that happens. I don't see any other way out. But the longer that this goes, I think the more impossible it seems. And I'm really sorry to say that. But we do know that wars end. They have ended before. countries somehow manage to gather themselves and move forward. And I hope that happens very soon with Ethiopia.
Do literature, poetry, and music, do you think, help maybe just a little bit?
I think literature and music can help us make sense of the aftermath. It can help us live through what the horrors that might be happening in our world. But I think that the poets, the writers, the artists, the musicians are some of the only ones who, the Asmari, can give voice to things that don't have a name yet. They are the ones that can help us understand how we continue and how we move forward when we don't even have a vocabulary to speak of what we've experienced or what we've witnessed. They help. So I hope that comes to Ethiopia. But I think with literature and poetry, it's hard to do it in the moment. It's usually after the fact that people begin to gather themselves, even the artists, and begin to put whatever happened into some form, some coherent
Let's try
form.
and make sense of it.
Absolutely.
I'm asking this because I'm really genuinely curious about the reactions this sort of book has had in Ethiopia and in Italy. Because as we were talking at the beginning, there's a sort of reinterpreting the national myth here. It's not all victory marches, as I was saying, and a glorious war. There's much more to it than that.
The book has opened the book in Italy has been received very well, but it is touching on a very uncomfortable history for people. And it has been really interesting to talk to Italians there. Some of them had no idea about this war. Most of them didn't know about it. It wasn't in textbooks. If they have a relative that went to Ethiopia as a soldier, often what would happen is that soldier would come back home
and never speak about it ever again.
Never speak about it. So there was no knowledge of this, even on a very intimate level. So the book is helping to open more conversations about this, and I've been really grateful for the way that Italians have embraced the book and made themselves willing to delve into this history that's uncomfortable. In Ethiopia, people know about this war, of course, but not many people knew about the women that fought. And most people only grew up, like me, hearing stories of bravery and solidarity and unity. And that's not the way it was. And the book is, I think, showing that side of the war to them. And I've been receiving good responses about that.
After all, nobody wants to remember his or her great-grandfather was potentially war criminal.
Absolutely, because the question then becomes, are we responsible for the sins of our grandfathers? What do we do with the weight of that history? How do we begin to reckon with it? And what kind of reconciliation is possible after time has passed? And I think it raises all these questions, and it's uncomfortable, and it's much easier to just ignore them. But I've been really grateful for the way that Italians have been talking about this and asking themselves these difficult questions, and Ethiopians as well.
Would you consider your book a success in this respect? Because it's a literary hit at this point in time. It's been nominated to countless prizes. It's translated in Romania, of all places, probably loads of other countries, and it does help with what you were mentioning just before. It does not let you forget. It confronts you with a hell of a lot of uncomfortable questions.
Someone asked me when I was in the process of writing this book, how I defined success, and I said, and I still say that it's not about awards. It's not about all of the public accolades. It's really in, if I can start conversations, if I can write something that creates questions where people didn't know that a question even existed to be asked, then I count that as success. So it's been I don't know, inspiring for me to have conversations with people from all over the world, and they can connect to this history in some way. Even if it's not exactly, Italy or Ethiopia, they can connect to it in some way through some memory, and to share in their stories and memories has been, it's been wonderful, and inspiring. So I count that as a success. And I have to say, I was absolutely excited when I found out that the book was going to be translated into Romanian, because I have to say that when I was a brand new writer, before I had ever published anything, I had a professor named Breitenbach, and he sent something I wrote to a Romanian journal, and that was my first ever publication and translation. So I have always had this soft spot in my heart. So when I found out that this book would be translated into Romanian, I was so happy. I remember
complete circle.
It was a complete circle, and I just remember how excited I was many years ago when I was a brand new writer. So this is great.
It's absolutely exciting to read your book in Romanian also. Maaza Mengiste, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ați ascultat Books Are Magic, powered by editura Nemira. Sunt Filip Standavid, toate cele bune!